Well, we're really excited about this event. We've put a lot of thought and care into it, and we really wanted to give high school students like all of us an outlet to and the methods and tools and the knowledge necessary to be able to make the change that we want to see happen. Because a lot of times the only thing that we're ever told is just to vote. But if you're like me, I am 17, so I cannot vote in this election, which was very discouraging until I started taking part in this work. So this is a really great way to make a change. So winning a transition to renewable energy in New Hampshire, a crash course. Sponsored by 350 New Hampshire and the youth team and
the New Hampshire High School Democrats.
So my name is Anna Rose.
My name is Ilinca Jondo.
And my name is Maddie Daniel.
And we're here tonight because we're passionate about youth activism and climate justice. And you can find us at our emails right here. So we're going to talk about how the climate crisis will affect New Hampshire, envisioning a livable future, the state of renewables in New Hampshire, issue-based organizing, practical ways of getting involved in the climate organizing from home, and creating an action plan. So first, how will the climate crisis affect New Hampshire? So the first part of the problem is that the climate crisis is happening now. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report says that we have only until 2030 to act. We need to reduce carbon emissions by almost half by 2030 and be net zero by 2050. And New Hampshire is not on the path to achieve these goals and is behind our neighbors in our environmental action, which is threatening our jobs and our public health. And currently, we are seeing the effects of the climate crisis all over the world. The severity of the record-breaking catastrophic wildfires in California and the ones a few like last year in Australia as well can be linked to the crisis due to drought and high temperature conditions. And of course, we're seeing lots of drastic glacier melt. So some specific stats on how it'll impact New Hampshire. As we enter into this fall, and we're in late September now, we are once again facing natural disaster season. And as New Hampshireites and as New Englanders, we're used to bracing for nor'easters. This is not a huge deal to us. However, if we do not make major social changes now, the effects of these natural disasters will severely worsen as the climate crisis progresses. Property damage in New Hampshire due to climate change could be as high as $4.4 billion. New Hampshire will see a loss of 2,600 acres of land, 25 miles of road, and 33 critical municipal facilities. And we have to mention that poor communities and communities of color are the most vulnerable to these environmental catastrophes because of systemic racism and classism. And many will become climate refugees in New Hampshire and abroad and the rest of the world because their homes will become unlivable. So in New Hampshire, with an increase in extreme heat days and drought in the summer and wetter springs, will pose threats to our food systems and farming communities, which means uncertainty for my generation and future generations, and millions of people around the world will be severely affected and many will die. So the second part of the problem is that we can't go to 100% renewable energy if we keep building new fossil fuel infrastructure. So as we can see here, we have all the solutions. This diagram shows a really good action plan of how energy distribution could work if we had renewable energy. And we can see that this is totally possible. And it will create, if you see down below the 40-year jobs created, it'll create so many jobs, tens of thousands of jobs. So why aren't we transitioning? We don't need coal in New England. And thanks to steadily decreasing regional energy demand since 2005 and the ample new cleaner energy sources joining the grid, there's enough energy capacity surplus in the region to handle the forecast maximum load of even the extreme heat wave scenario without using coal or gas. Further, according to the Carsey School of Public Policy, UNH, Their findings suggest that there's no immediate need for New Hampshire to expand natural gas pipeline infrastructure. So not even should we not transition just for moral environmental reasons, but we don't need to. We don't need to keep building this pipeline infrastructure, but we keep doing it for the wrong reasons. And that's the third part of the problem. Fossil fuel executives and some politicians are holding us back. Overwhelmingly, people know that humans are causing the crisis and the effects of the crisis will be catastrophic, and they want the government to take action. That's Republican and Democrat. Governments and corporations will not take the necessary action for a just and rapid transition to renewable energy if they're just left to their own devices. We've seen this since the 70s. While each of us goes to great effort to reduce our personal carbon emissions, the reality is that just 100 companies, that's just 100, are responsible for 70% of emissions worldwide. We can't keep letting massive corporations destroy our climate because they would much rather sit back as money flows into their pockets, watching the world burn. Individual actions and market-based solutions are not enough. The fossil fuel industry's undue influence on our society and our politicians and the entrenched economic and political status quo rooted in fossil fuel dependency are barriers to the progress of all of us. And further, we have a moral obligation. As the largest historical emitter, the United States has a moral and legal obligation and responsibility to cut emissions. This video essentially illustrates this. So it shows the largest cumulative CO2 emissions since before the Industrial Revolution. And it kind of tells more than I can say. So you can see with every increasing year how the cumulative CO2 emissions kind of creep up. And it won't take long for the US to surpass the United Kingdom. This is environmental justice implications because all of our emissions from the US as a country and then also other wealthy countries like the UK, like Germany, like France, these other predominantly white, rich, wealthy nations, we have caused all of this damage that is now hurting so many of the smaller nations, the nations with less political capital, the islands, the global south, all of these countries that did not contribute to CO2 emissions anywhere near how much we have. And we are hurting them by our actions. So that's how far our obligation stretches. We have an obligation to the entire world, not just our own citizenry. So, how do we envision a livable future? In order to envision our future, we must understand where we are now. So right now, we're living through an unprecedented moment in our country. We're seeing 3 overlapping crises. The coronavirus pandemic is bringing about unprecedented unemployment and economic recession. We're seeing systemic and extreme economic inequality. And the climate crisis is already hitting areas of our world and people that contributed the least to carbon emissions and are the most vulnerable to the coronavirus. And woven into all these 3 is systemic racism, for which our country is finally and thankfully having a reckoning. So in order to fight for a livable present and future, we need to know what we are fighting for. This is easier said than done. It is much easier to advocate for nostalgia because we have concrete knowledge about what it was like to live in the past. Thus, it is more difficult to fight for a progressive vision because not only do we have to win major political battles, but we have to envision our ideal future and develop policy platforms that will get us there. Additionally, if we want to convince our politicians and community members to join our grassroots cause, then we have to start by selling them on this vision. Then we can use other organizing tactics to win renewable energy in New Hampshire. Through it all, we have to have hope. So what I want to do is I want to put you all into breakout rooms so that you can all talk about what you would like to see in your future. So what kinds of policies would you like to have in place? What kind of political battles would you like to win? If you looked outside your window, what would you want to see? What would your natural environment, your city, your town look like? These are really big questions. They're really hard to answer, so we want to put you in groups so that's a little bit easier to bounce ideas off of each other. So does anyone have any questions before we get into that? No? Cool. Ilinca, I think you have to be the one to put us into breakout rooms.
Sounds good. I'm doing that right now.
You have the power. So something to help you is think about what would you like to see in 5 years versus 10 years versus 15 versus 20 and so forth. Sometimes that makes it easier for me. And then are there any bills and policies that are already proposed that you would like to have win, or are there some that you're like, oh, I wish there was a bill that gave us this blank? So be as creative as you want, be as concrete as you want. It's all about what you want to see in your future.
The breakout rooms are in progress. I'm almost there.
You can also think about what would you want the common sense policies to be in this time frame in the future. So a good example is Medicare for all, right? And it was originally proposed by Truman in 1945, which blew my mind when I learned that in US history last spring. But it was originally proposed in 1945, and everyone thought he was crazy. And then flash forward to this election, right? And we have Bernie, and he's saying, Medicare for all, Medicare for all, Medicare for all, and others, not just Bernie. But I mean, up until 6 months ago, people still thought it was crazy. And now with the coronavirus pandemic, people are starting to come around to it a bit more. So the political alignment, as we like to say, is changing. So what would you like the common sense political alignment to be in your future? You can also think about that too.
The breakout rooms are ready, so I'll be opening them right now.
Sweet.
Do I join one? Let's see.
I don't know. I don't think the host does. So I would have no idea.
I hope I can. I don't know. I've never done this before, so okay.
Good job.
Let's hope it is working. I'm going to join breakout room 2. I think it should work. Awesome. Welcome back. Some people are still trickling back in.
Let me know when they're all back.
I'm gonna just close all the rooms, so hopefully that should work. Okay, I'm going to try typing on here and see if it works. Okay, awesome.
So is everyone back?
I'm still waiting on a couple people. We have 9 and I think we need 11 or 12. Just gonna wait a couple more seconds. In the meantime, why don't we start sharing out what we talked about in our breakout rooms? You can just unmute yourselves and talk.
Yeah, go for it.
In my room, we talked a bit about conserving water and making it easier for families to get renewable energy and incorporate that into their lives, either through a carbon fee and dividend or tax cuts or subsidies. We also talked about climate education, cutting down waste. We definitely have a lot of goals. I'll try to type those in. Feel free to jump in with any other points you talked about.
I was kind of sitting by myself over here, but something that I was thinking about was, doing more work like this and making it normal for young people to be really involved in politics and not just have it be a minority of young people. So that was really important. And then something else I was thinking about was just, in general, elected officials not being corrupt and championing and being a champion for our causes was a big one. Did anybody have any policies that they were thinking of? It could be climate, or if you're thinking of a social justice type of policy or criminal justice, or if you want to see a new type of policing kind of policy situation, type of defund sort of situation, or a reproductive rights bill, or healthcare, anything. Really, the floor is yours. This is your future. This is a climate call, but all of the issues are very intersectional. So, anything goes.
I'll just quick mention that my breakout room talked about Green New Deal a little bit and seeing some solar panels and wind turbines everywhere instead of smokestacks.
I really love that visual.
Yeah.
Definitely what we want to see. And then, I think an important point is that climate justice is social justice. And as Anna Rose said, things like reforming our criminal justice system and making sure that people have access to healthcare and to an education, that all contributes to the future that we want to see that is more sustainable. And I just thought of helping harness the jobs from clean energy.
Oh, I'm seeing some things in the chat. Okay, cool. So more compromise among policymakers. Free college, yes, definitely. I'm currently applying to college right now, so I totally relate. And then a just transition in general. So yeah, a just transition, when we talk about that, is all about just making sure that no one is left behind when we do transition to renewables. Sweet, this is a super healthy list, guys.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go back to presentation mode. So then, as you experience, we came up with this really awesome list, but it wasn't necessarily that easy to do, right? It's hard to envision something that's so abstract. So, I mean, and especially too, right now, many of us, myself included, have felt hopeless at times via, lost opportunities or lost traditions that you can't do, right? It's Halloween, it's Thanksgiving, it's Christmas, it's Hanukkah, it's all of the holidays, whatever ones you celebrate, that are going to be affected. And so we have to think to ourselves, I can almost envision the world that I want to live in, but how can it be possible from where we are now? And that's totally fine. It's fine to feel that way. And it's totally normal, and it's terrifying to make yourself vulnerable enough by laying all of your hopes and dreams on the line where they can be squashed. But it's one of the most important lessons you can leave here with, is that you should dream big. You shouldn't be afraid to dream big. It's the only way for us to even come close to winning. Consider every possible aspect of your ideal world. Let your imagination carry you to do thousands of thought experiments, a la Einstein, in your head. As you walk down the street, you might envision, if you see a smokestack, somewhere off in the distance, maybe in your mind drop a windmill there or something. I don't know, but just be creative with it, because once you do, you'll unlock a whole new side of your passion for this work. So some of you may have seen this video before. It's always worth a rewatch. It's beautiful in message and in method of the visual. And I love this video because AOC puts visioning into practice.
The bullet train from New York to DC. It always brings me back to when I first started making this commute. In 2019, I was a freshman in the most diverse Congress in history. Up to that point, it was a critical time. I'll never forget the children in our community. They were so inspired to see this new class of politicians who reflected them, navigating the halls of power. It's often said, you can't be what you can't see. And for the first time, they saw themselves. I think there was something similar with the Green New Deal. We knew that we needed to save the planet and that we had all the technology to do it, but people were scared. They said it was too big, too fast, not practical. I think that's because they just couldn't picture it yet. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with how we got here. 1977, New York. A senior scientist named James Black made a presentation about how burning fossil fuels could eventually lead to global temperatures rising 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Within 2 years, one of the world's biggest supertankers was outfitted with a state-of-the-art lab to measure CO2 in the ocean, gathering more data about global warming. Guess who was doing all of this research? ExxonMobil, the oil and gas company. Oh yeah, Exxon knew this whole time, as did our politicians. 10 years later, James Hansen, NASA's top climate scientist, told Congress he was 99% certain that global warming was happening and caused by humans. That was 1988, the year before I was even born. So did Exxon listen to the science, including their own? Did they change business models, invest in renewables? No, the opposite. They knew and they doubled down. They and others spent millions setting up a network of lobby groups and think tanks to create doubt and denial about climate change. It was an effort designed to attack and dispute the very kind of science they themselves had been doing. And it worked. Politicians went to bat for fossil fuels, and these massive corporations kept digging and mining, drilling and fracking like there was no tomorrow. America became the biggest producer and consumer of oil in the world. Fossil fuel companies made hundreds of billions, while the public paid the lion's share to clean up their disasters. We lost a generation of time we'll never get back. Entire species will never get back. Natural wonders gone forever. And in 2017, Hurricane Maria destroyed the place where my family was from, Puerto Rico. It was like a climate bomb. It took as many American lives as 9/11. And in the next year, when I was elected to Congress, the world's leading climate scientists declared another emergency. They told us that we had 12 years left to cut our emissions in half, or hundreds of millions of people would be more likely to face food and water shortages, poverty, and death. 12 years to change everything. How we got around, how we fed ourselves, how we made our stuff, how we lived and worked, everything. The only way to do it was to transform our economy, which we already knew was broken, since the vast majority of wealth was going to just a small handful of people, and most folks were falling further and further behind. It was a true turning point. Lots of people gave up. They said we were doomed. But some of us remembered that as a nation, we'd been in peril before. The Great Depression, World War II. We knew from our history how to pull together to overcome impossible odds. And at the very least, we owed it to our children to try. The wave began when Democrats took back the House in 2018, and then the Senate and the White House in 2020, and launched the decade of the Green New Deal, a flurry of legislation that kicked off our social and ecological transformation to save the planet. It was the kind of swing for the fence ambition we needed. Finally, we were entertaining solutions on the scale of the crises we faced without leaving anyone behind. That included Medicare for All, the most popular social program in American history. We also introduced the federal jobs guarantee, a public option including dignified living wages for work. Funnily enough, the biggest problem in those early years was a labor shortage. We were building a national smart grid, retrofitting every building in America, putting trains like this one all across the country. We needed more workers. That group of kids from my neighborhood were right in the middle of it all, especially this one girl, Ilinca. Her first job out of college was with AmeriCorps Climate, restoring wetlands and bayous in coastal Louisiana. Most of her friends were in her union, including some oil workers in transition. They took apart old pipelines and got to work planting mangroves with the same salary and benefits. Of course, when it came to healing the land, we had huge gaps in our knowledge. Luckily, Indigenous communities offered generational expertise to help guide the way. Ilinca got restless, tried her hand as a solar plant engineer for a while, but eventually made her career in raising the next generation as part of the Universal Child Care Initiative. As it turns out, caring for others is valuable, low-carbon work, and we started paying real money to folks like teachers, domestic workers, and home health aides. Those were years of massive change, and not all of it was good. When Hurricane Sheldon hit southern Florida, parts of Miami went underwater for the last time. But as we battled the floods, fires, and droughts, we knew how lucky we were to have started acting when we did. And we didn't just change the infrastructure, we changed how we did things. We became a society that was not only modern and wealthy, but dignified and humane too. By committing to universal rights like healthcare and meaningful work for all, we stopped being so scared of the future. We stopped being scared of each other, and we found our shared purpose. Ilinca heard the call too, and in 2028, she ran for office in the first cycle of publicly funded election campaigns. And now she occupies the seat that I once held. I couldn't be more proud of her, a true child of the Green New Deal. When I think back to my first term in Congress, riding that old school Amtrak in 2019, all of this was still ahead of us. And the first big step was just closing our eyes and imagining it. We can be whatever we have the courage to see.
So this video gets me every time. And it does so because she uses hope and imagination, and she makes the story personal and creates a compelling narrative. And by using very definitive language like we will or Ilinca was, instead of vague hypotheticals like if we could get this policy or if Ilinca could possibly maybe get elected, AOC is giving us the permission to believe and say that the vision that we see can come true if we work hard enough. And this is an act of healing if any of you, like me, struggle from climate anxiety, just kind of the fear and worry over what could happen if we don't win. And it's a radical act because by doing this visioning, you are protesting the status quo. And AOC makes our ideal future seem more attainable just by her messaging tactic, by personalizing it and using this definitive language. Her vision is not very different from the one we brainstormed, but so now you can see that if we use these kind of tactics, we can make our vision seem just as attainable as hers, because ultimately it is. So additionally, we have to know why we are fighting. This question is central to the success of our work, and without knowing your motivation, your efforts will not be sustainable. So my reason for getting involved in this work is because I love this planet, I love the climate, and that was kind of my first foray into learning more about sustainability and earth science and all of those good things. And as I got older, I was also, especially around 2016 election, I got so much more invested in learning about politics, learning everything I could, and, you know, protesting for various social justice issues whenever I could. And I realized that the climate movement and all the social justice movements are really the same movement for a new progressive future. And because they're so intersectional and so interconnected. So that's how I got involved. Also, like I said, I can't vote. So this is my way of making a difference. But I'd love to know what your all's reasons are. And you can go ahead and put them in the chat. I don't know, Ilinca, if you want to share yours, but.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, mine stemmed from the same places as Anna Rose. I mean, I grew up loving the planet, but I also grew up, ever since I began taking science classes, learning about climate change and about environmental degradation. So when I got to the point when I was learning about, you know, our politics and the lack of action, I was so surprised because I had grown up knowing that this was a problem. It was literally ingrained into my childhood. So to know that as I'd grown up, nothing was being done, it was a very scary prospect, because as the AOC video said, we've known about this for decades, and it's very, very imperative that we act now. So I learned how easy it was to get involved just a couple years later, when I learned what it was like to just go testify at the State House. I had a science teacher who encouraged me to do it, and then after that, I realized it was so easy to take action, and that really motivated me to continue through different avenues, protests or just writing. And I think what's really empowering about activism in general and advocacy is that anyone can do it in whatever way works for them. So that's why I'm fighting. And I'll pass it on to Maddie.
Sorry about that, I was muted. I am fighting for climate change because I believe in a sustainable future where we all can thrive and we can hand the planet down to future generations of people and make a better place for others.
Yeah, and I just want to read out what Rebecca said. She said that she has asthma, and so do people who live in her hometown where there's a coal plant. So she wanted to make a better future for her community and people across the country. Yeah, that's awesome. You know, feel free to keep thinking about it. It's just a really important question for you to stay committed and for this work to be sustainable for you. So the state of renewables in New Hampshire. So in December 2018, 350 New Hampshire won our campaign for offshore wind, which was a big deal. We knew that we need to stop burning fossil fuels in order to avoid catastrophic climate change and sea level rise, like I already said. So it was up to us to lead the way to renewable energy at the local and statewide level. And for New Hampshire, that meant offshore wind, because New Hampshire has the capacity to generate 2,600 megawatts of energy, which is enough to supply the entire state, just with offshore wind. Wind keeps money in our local economy, and New Hampshire spends over $6 billion per year buying dirty energy from out of state. So we knew we need to transition. It also creates long-term jobs, and ratepayers will save money. And so for 3 years, 350 New Hampshire and our allies pushed New Hampshire governors, first Maggie Hassan, and then when she left office, Governor Sununu, our current governor, and our allies pushed as well to request a task force, which is the first step in starting the process to bring offshore wind to New Hampshire. And we won big time by building community support and knowing that we had to convince the governor that we, the people, as the sign says, want to bring offshore wind energy to New Hampshire. So we delivered over 1,000 petitions. We passed over 21 resolutions and warrant articles in towns and cities across the state, urging our governor to request this task force from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management to start the process. And we gathered over 100 people on Earth Day at the Capitol to deliver letters from towns. And so then we could win in December of 2018. And then more recently, this one's very exciting, July 31st, 2020, just a few months ago, we won our campaign to stop the Granite Bridge pipeline. So this campaign was proposed by Liberty Utilities, and it would be built along Route 101. And it would carry liquefied natural gas, which is methane. And methane is 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide over the first 20 years. So it's really bad. This pipeline would also include a holding tank that is just incredibly massive. That's the only way to describe it, just massive. So it would cost ratepayers $340 million over 40 years. So we were scared that they would feel the need to make use out of their investment. And not only would it become obsolete quickly, but it would, on the way to becoming obsolete, the pipeline would damage your wallet, our public health, and of course our climate and our natural environment and ecosystems due to all of the toxins that would leach into our water and soil. So we built massive public opposition again. We denied the permits. We supported frontline communities by canvassing and spreading the word and doing tons and tons of education. And we shifted the narrative. We organized phone calls and email drives. We built coalitions. We got youth in the movement and so much more. And through all of this, our success in these campaigns proves that with massive grassroots action, we can win big in New Hampshire. The No Coal, No Gas Coalition. So in July of 2019, 350 New Hampshire joined the No Coal, No Gas Coalition, aimed to shut down the Merrimack Generating Station in Bow, New Hampshire, which is the last major coal-fired power plant in New Hampshire that does not have a shutdown date. It is just 1 hour. In just 1 hour, this plant emits as much carbon as the average American does in 26 years. So you could live until you're 25 and not emit as much carbon as this plant does in just 1 hour. So the reasons to get rid of this plant are, again, economic, climate, and for environmental justice. Millions of dollars of subsidies from the government, and the town of Bow pays $1 million just to keep this plant operating. The owners of this plant are just profiting, and building renewable energy infrastructure would benefit all of us. Additionally, the coal plant pollutes the Merrimack River, which is hurting Native peoples, and it's really causing a lot of asthma, heart attacks, and death in the surrounding areas. So again, our strategy for this, because it's an ongoing fight, is we are building, again, massive public opposition by showing the owners that we have enough power to keep coming back time and time again and making it so difficult for them to operate the plant that they'll just have to shut down. So that will send a message to other utility companies as well. And so we've done massive public actions. We've blockaded the coal trains that come to the plant, and we've gathered over 300 people on September 28th, 2019 on the lot across the plant in the field to give speeches and just protest the plant in general. And this was one of the biggest acts of civil disobedience in New Hampshire since the 70s, and 69 people were arrested. Also, keep a lookout. On October 3rd, we are going to plan another, we'll have another action that is currently being planned, so just keep a lookout for what we do. And then lastly, New Hampshire Renews. So this is, again, a more recent development. We joined New Hampshire Renews this summer, and it's a growing coalition of more than 50 leading grassroots organizations, labor unions, racial justice organizations, frontline communities, and environmental advocates. And we've come together to address our region's overlapping crises: mass unemployment, racial justice, the coronavirus pandemic, and climate change. So this is really our reaction to our current moment. And we're fighting for a regional Green New Deal, and we're supporting politicians that will get us there. So, issue-based organizing in Ilinca.
Yeah, so my name is Ilinca Drondo, and I am the advocacy director of the New Hampshire High School Democrats. So how do we harness the vision that we've built for our future, and how do we take action? Well, all of us began getting involved for one reason or the other. Some of us became passionate about a certain issue, like myself. I got interested in activism and advocacy because I wanted to take climate action, but others are really passionate about a specific candidate, and that's how they got started. Well, these aren't two vastly different things on opposite ends of the spectrum. These are really connected, and so issue-based organizing is incredibly powerful. Instead of fighting just for one candidate, we want to introduce you to the idea of building a united grassroots force that's fighting for policy platforms and many aligned candidates. So this can allow us to take action on these issues that we care about, like climate, and still support incredible candidates that'll help us achieve the change we need. So a candidate that will not help us achieve this change is our governor, Sununu. So we just wanted to give you a bit of a quick rundown on why Sununu is so detrimental to the environment and to New Hampshire, and give you the facts you need to fight against his re-election. So Sununu's record on climate, let's break it down. When it comes to fracked gas, he plans to run the state entirely on this for decades to come. In 2018, he released a state energy strategy that called for more reliance on nuclear power and gas. His biggest campaign contributors, coincidentally, are nuclear and gas companies. So this includes nuclear power plant owner NextEra, Eversource, and Liberty Utilities. In 2019, our legislature passed so many bipartisan bills, only to have a record number of 57 vetoed. And that number is just the bipartisan bills, not even all of the bills. Sununu is clearly proud of these civil service failures because he auctions off veto memorabilia. So his record on climate is less than stellar. Is carbon the leading reason why the Earth has warmed up pretty much continuously over the last 150 years? I'm not sure, he said. Well, science is. So this is just a quote from NHPR that details the campaign contributions he has received from Eversource, NextEra, Liberty Utilities, Unitil, and other lobbying firms and energy companies. Sununu's climate denial and obstructionism is not compatible with a livable future for our generation and for generations to come. So, in order to fight against the election of candidates that are not practical when it comes to climate, we wanted to give you ways to get involved in organizing from home. First off, how do you contact your officials? It's incredibly important to sit and talk to your officials in person if you can, or to contact them in some other way. This is how you can really directly influence their actions and how they vote, and it's incredibly important to do so. So what's effective? If your member of Congress, your senator, your representative has not arrived at a firm decision on an issue, how can you influence them? This handy graphic, I think, really breaks it down. Of course, in-person issue visits from constituents are the most impactful, but any contact from a constituent who represents other constituents can really sway them. So if you're part of your high school Dems chapter at your school, or maybe you're part of an organization like 350, or even just a young person or somebody who is a member of a community of people who think like you, make sure to mention that as you reach out, because you're a constituent who does represent other constituents. Sending them individualized postal letters is also really effective, and it serves a dual purpose now that the USPS is in danger of being defunded. So buying those stamps, sending those letters, are really effective ways to help your member of Congress make a decision on an issue if they haven't arrived on it. Individualized email messages, phone calls, the vast majority of these you can do safely from home. So just wanted to go over a letter to Congress versus a letter to the editor and how you can use these and write these. So a letter to Congress informs your Congress member that as a constituent, you really care about a certain issue. You can ask them to co-sponsor a bill, you can thank them for something they've done, or call them out for something they haven't done. This serves to influence public policy. You can also write a letter to the editor, so this would be to an editor of a newspaper or a journal, and if published, this can raise awareness among a whole community of readers and be easily circulated online. You can submit it to a local news source, but I know climate activists who are friends who have gotten their letters to the editor published by the New York Times, the Boston Globe, so aim high. This generally responds to an issue or a headline, so you want to keep it pretty current, but then again, with climate, this is a crisis that is always here and not going away, so. Extra tips, don't underestimate the power of your own story, so back it with facts. Give people something to do immediately after reading, like your member of Congress, ask them to vote for a bill. Your community, ask them to show up at the next town meeting once things are more back to normal, or read a specific resource. Always proofread and definitely share it on social media. This is an example LTE that I wrote a while ago, but in the interest of time, I'll just quickly skim. I wrote this to the editor after the state Senate rejected bills restricting the use of single-use plastic bags and straws. So I mentioned that on behalf of myself and other youth, I'm disappointed. I talked about why young people are acting and why we care about this bill and what people can do in their lives to take concrete action. So you can also call your legislators, and again, the same tips apply. Use your own story as well as the facts. Mention that you're a constituent, and if, like me, you find phone calls really scary, it's very helpful to prepare key points of what you want to say beforehand and have a clear ask. But it's actually not that scary. You'll likely talk to an intern who's probably in college or just out of it. And a call is influential, so organize a call-in day if you can. Small drops can make an ocean. And finally, you can harness social media, either using Twitter to interact real time and pressure politicians with NH Politics to amplify your tweet, if you would prefer. You can use Instagram to build your following and movement. Infographics are definitely a big thing nowadays, and they're really helpful to break down an issue. YouTube can tell the world and educate, and Facebook is quite useful for scheduling. So yeah, now I'm going to pass it over to our Legislative Advocacy Director, Maddie, who can give you a quick rundown on bills and legislation.
Hello, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Maddie Daniel. I'm the Legislative Director for NHHSD, and I'm here today to talk to you about legislative advocacy and some tools that are used when looking to begin advocating. And I promise I'll keep this nice and quick since we're running a little bit over time here. So what is legislative advocacy? In short, it refers to the efforts made by ordinary citizens to influence the introduction, implementation, or modification of a piece of legislation. It's a way to let the people who represent us know our opinions on issues and offer them constructive solutions. And there are many different ways to advocate for legislation and something that appeals to everyone. So as Ilinca touched on earlier, there are many ways that one can advocate for legislation. You can email, call your reps, write testimony, write a letter to the editor, spread the word on social media. There's many more as well, but these are just some of the more popular forms. So a lot of times people will ask, does legislative advocacy even work? Yes, legislative advocacy makes a difference. If a representative that you are contacting is unsure how they feel about a bill, but have overwhelming support from their constituents on one side or the other, then they will most likely lean that way. So what does legislative advocacy look like during COVID-19? Unfortunately, during the COVID crisis, both the House and Senate are not meeting in person. We must transition our advocacy methods online in order to compensate for this. So to testify while the House and Senate are still online, different committees which hear bills accept testimonies. These committees include education, criminal justice, and agriculture. And to find out which committee a bill is being heard on once approved in their email to reach out, you can use GenCourt, but more on that later. So this is just a list of bills to help advocate for. Information will be sent out with these after the meeting. These ones are concerning climate change, and these next ones are concerning renewable energy. So what is GenCourt? GenCourt stands for the New Hampshire General Court. It's a website used to track legislation in New Hampshire. Bills from both the House and Senate are on there, and it's really easy to navigate once you know where to look. So once you pull up GenCourt at the URL on the last slide, you'll see this screen. The first important feature of GenCourt is that you can track LSRs for the upcoming session. And for those of you who don't know what an LSR is, it is a legislative service request or a rough draft of a bill that must be approved. If you click on that tab, you will be brought to this page, which allows you to search for LSRs. You can search based on the legislative body for the most broad results. If you know the number of the LSR, you can search that as well, or the sponsor. My favorite tool, though, is if you are looking for LSRs based on a certain issue. So, for example, to look up LSRs that correlate to renewable energy, you would use the second option. And once you hit search, you will be brought up with a list of all the renewable energy LSRs. To look more specifically at the entire bill, you can click the blue link, which will give you the text of it. And to read up or get contact information of a sponsor, you can click on any representative's name. So back to the home screen, another important feature is that it allows one to look up who their state representatives and senators are so that they know who to contact when reaching out with their opinion. When you click on one of these two links right there, it'll bring you to a page that looks like this. This one's for the House, but the Senate one is identical. And to see your representative, so on that voting record slide there, you see the different legislative sessions, and to look at either the House or Senate, choose the session year below. So, and yeah, by choosing the session year, it brings you to the next page. And now that you know your representative, you can easily scroll down and find them to see how they have voted on past legislation. And if looking for a specific bill, then you can use that first section under the left, which says bill numbers, and that'll allow you to see how every single House of Representatives member voted. And lastly, why is this all important? Legislative advocacy is a way for us to use our voices and make an impact in our democracy. It allows us to make real proactive change and help get laws passed, which will better the community. And lastly, we are not owning up to our responsibilities of the Constitution and being involved citizens if we are not advocating for legislation and being proactive. And now I will turn it back to Ilinca to talk about relational organizing.
Awesome. Let me quickly stop sharing my screen so I can let Anna Rose back in. But yeah, so there she is. Awesome. Okay, let me share it once more. So relational organizing, essentially in relational organizing, you harness the power of your network, your friends, your family, your neighbors, and you can share with them personal stories about the issues that matter most to them or to you, and it can really reach so many people, as you can see in this graphic. So relational organizing is another tool you can use in your advocacy in general, and it can actually be incredibly helpful because a lot of people are left out of the conversation. A significant proportion of the population is not included on traditional voter file and consumer lists, and that's at least 11% of adults. an additional 12% are mislisted, and especially marginalized communities like Latinx and African American people are unreachable because they're not on these lists. So by contacting your communities, you can help contact those who are politically invisible in America. And how can you do this? So relational organizing is super easy, and it's even fun. You can build a list of contacts and reach out to them to make sure they're educated before the election, and then they vote, incorporating calls to action and having meaningful conversations. So my list of 10 looks a lot like my friends who just turned 18, including my parents. I can have my parents' friends as well, my teachers, anyone who I want to reach out to, who I know can vote, is worth adding to this list. And this maximizes my impact because I'm not yet 18, but if I can convince 3 people who wouldn't otherwise vote to vote, that's impactful. And even though I can't vote myself, it will really be able to make that impact that I can't at this point. So it's really amazing if you reach out to your network and encourage them to either vote, sign a petition, make a plan, take an action. And finally, we are pretty much out of time, but we wanted to guide you through creating an action plan. So with all these tools that we've talked about, from legislative advocacy to relational organizing, to contacting your officials, and to even envisioning what your future looks like, you can have all the basics essentially to take action by yourself. So we are going to be sending out a Google form after this event that has a section for you to put in what you're hoping to do to take action on a specific issue. Anything that we talked about, anything else you might come up with is welcome. And you'll also be able to indicate whether you need any help from High School Dems or 350 in order to make this a reality. We're here to help, and we would love to include you in our advocacy or help amplify yours. So be sure to fill that out once we send it. And yeah, our key takeaways.
So the first takeaway is that the climate crisis is happening now and it is affecting all of us in every part of our world. I don't know if you've ever heard, especially right now, the metaphor like we're all in the same storm, we're all in the same boat. Well, in this case, due to ingrained systems and structures in our society that create inequity and that oppress many groups, we're all in the same storm, but we're all in different boats. So we're all affected differently, and we'll all be able to leave some of us more unscathed than others. The second is that you must be able to have a vision and know why you are fighting. The third is that in New Hampshire, we have the capacity to win big, and there's so much work left to do.
But to achieve this work, there are so many avenues for action. And not being able to vote doesn't mean that you can't make an impact. So as a young person, your voice is even more necessary because you're going to be among the ones who are affected the most by the climate crisis. And there's actually a lot you can do that will really have a massive impact, like what we talked about. So we want to encourage you to get involved today, and pass it on to Anna Rose.
Yeah, so to get involved with the 350 New Hampshire youth team, you can contact Sarah Tupper. She's our recruitment fellow, at her email. And in this Google form, we'll have all of these links and resources all ready for you. And you can sign up to join the youth team for the launch of our September 20th for our 2020-2021 team. You can also follow us on Instagram at 350 New Hampshire Action, and on Twitter at 350NH and at 350 New Hampshire _action.
And when it comes to the high school Democrats, we encourage you to start your own chapter at your school or join our brand new virtual chapter for those who don't have the capacity to start a chapter or don't go to a traditional school. You can still be part of our organization. So High School Dems connects you to a lot of opportunities to volunteer for campaigns and take action on specific issues like this one. So if you're interested, we will have all the info linked. And you can also follow us on social media and find us on our website. And yeah, thank you so much for coming and spending your evening with us. We really appreciate this, and we really hope that hopefully you'll come off with something concrete that you want to do to take action, or just more ideas for the world you want to live in the future. So thank you for coming, and feel free to ask us any questions. I cannot see whether there are any with my screen share view. So if you do have any questions and you didn't get the chance to ask them, you'll have all our contact info in the email we'll send out. So yeah, thank you so much for coming, and we hope you have a great night.